Hello, I'm Hannah from Who Dolls. It's a bit of a weird project. Honestly, I don't feel like I have the right to make this because I call him Conehead for a couple of years. But then I was like, you know what, they're gonna release a new game, they're maybe working on a movie at that time. Loved the first movie, loved Pyramid Head. I don't know stuff, I just do my little, I'm a little silly crafter. Conehead, Pyramid Head, let's do it.
I bought these about 2 years ago to try something new, and for this project I needed muscles. It's a Mattel Natalia doll, and the only downside was that one of her hands fell off, but look at this face paint. It even has a tiny scar, so you know what, for the price I paid, I am really impressed. I won't use her head though, so I put it aside and started on clothes. I decided on a leather bra and skirt, starting by taping the chest and waist. Then I marked down to cut the pieces, peel them off the body and transfer them onto paper. I'm used to working with unrealistic body types, so filming this felt awkward. After tracing and cutting the pieces from white fall leather, I hand sew them together. I glued some parts first to ensure that I did it right. I glued this thing in the back before I put on the clothes, but it looks great. Finally, I added the shoulder straps. Next, I made the skirt by cutting it into pieces and sewing it back together. The goal was to make it look mended, and yeah, it looks pretty great. Yep, it's totally cool, but it's too white and clean, so let's mess it up. First I bundled it together and tied it with strings, then they got a hot bath. Since fall leather is made from plastic, I tried it on scrap piece first to ensure it wouldn't melt. After a couple of minutes, I take it out, cut the strings, and it's wrinkled. Next I use this wash from Army Painter. It sneaks into all the little crevices, making them more prominent, plus the thread turns brown, which is quite neat. I thin out some brown and black acrylics and use a brush to spray them onto the fabrics, and there we go, much better. It looks horrible. Next I made some shoes. I was better at explaining this in my boot video, but anyway, I covered the foot with cling foil, glued pieces of tissue paper onto them and let it dry. Oh, I added some extra at the toes to give it more of a boot shape. Then I taped it with masking tape, marked the lines, cut it out and used it as a pattern. I used this old fall leather piece. It was in really bad shape, making it perfect for this project, and yeah, this made the side panels for the boots. Doesn't look like much at this point though. Next I fixed the edges by cutting and gluing little lines before sewing them. Finally I can start attaching the pieces to the base, first the front, then the toes, then the sides. I tuck the pieces underneath as well as possible, then I move on to make the soles. I made them from epoxy clay in 3 parts. I first made the plateau in the front and let that cure for 24 hours, then I made the sole, added a little toothpick and let that cure. Finally I sculpted the heel. Then I cut off the excess and sanded it a bit, then I decided to use UV gel polish for the heel to make it shiny and sturdy. But first I wanted to make the edge smoother, which I did with Gutta. This is by far the worst smelling thing I've ever handled, and I have 2 dogs. After adding a thin layer, I cured the soles under a UV lamp several times to be sure, and this is the result. Shoes and clothes are done, let's move on to some body blushing. I prepare the body by buffing the surface with fine-grained sandpaper. After a coat of MSC, I start blushing. Then I took watered-down acrylics to add more veins, returned with purple pastels and added some red to the fingertips. She is supposed to be half alive, so you know, why not? Then I sprinkled some brown acrylics all over, sprayed again with MSC, and the blushing was finished. I superglued the skirt directly onto the body, then glued the bra straps for those physics-defying proportions, and now she's getting more dressed and this is getting more appropriate, sort of. Some details never hurt anyone, these are completely random and in theory useless, but she got some leather straps. I used watered down black acrylics and a Q-tip to make them look worn. I'm attaching it here, which was tricky, but in the end it was worth it. This is what I have now, and it is getting somewhere. The body is done and I could start on the head. First I made a paper template, then I stared at my calculations, realizing I did something wrong, then I did it right before leveling it up into cardboard and finally moving on to the glass. I taped them together using masking tape, and this was so much fun, especially when it all fell into place, and this was my prototype, which I used to glue small popsicles for the bottom part. While that dries, I made a glass pyramid. This is broken glass from old windows I found in the garage. Apparently there are different kinds, as you see here. I decided to use the bluish one, not sure if it makes a difference. I first draw the lines with a permanent marker, no worries, it's removable. Lesson learned from when my son drew on the car with one of these pencils. Anyway, I have made so many mistakes with this and I still do, but practice makes it a bit more perfect, and here I'm adding copper foil tape to the edges. It looks so cool afterwards. This will give the solder something to stick to. Here I'm taping it all together, trying to get it right. Then I start the soldering. I use solder flux to make it stick better. I wanted to keep the copper visible and just set, the edges. This stinks, by the way, a lot. I take off the tape and it's finished. Since the base will endure some pressure, I didn't want to make it out of glass. Here I'm cutting the popsicles that I glued before soldering. This is not in the order I made it in real life, but you know what? Let's build a church. I tried to find a miniature papercraft template that resembled the building in the movie, but this is what I saw and it was pretty cool. The only problem was that I printed the instructions in miniature too. Oops. But all is well that ends well, and I had to wing it. I'm not sure which church this is. I rebuilt it though. It's quite cute. To weather it, I used pastels, then I was finished. Big difference. To make the landscape, I sculpted it with paper clay, making sure the church wouldn't tilt at some weird angle, and then I made the stairs. Oh, the stairs. I've never made anything like it, but it was so much fun. So many tiny details, I loved it. I wanted tiny crosses for the graveyard and thought about how to make them, and in the end I cut them out of this net. Super small. After gluing them to the paper, I bulked them up with some gutta, then I started painting. I used a bluish green trying to mimic the tint of Silent Hill in the movie, and then I painted a stairwell, adding details by dry brushing it with light grey, then I used some watered down black acrylics to enhance the details. Ugh, it looks so great. I'm so happy with it. I glued the church at the base. The cracks in the clay don't matter because I then cover the ground in mossy grass, and yeah, I loved making this miniature landscape. I want to make more. After drying, I added some dark grey pastels to mute the color and some blood to the stairs. Then I wanted some barbed wire to fill the space, and fun fact, they wanted to have multiple pyramid heads in the church at the end of the movie, but due to the budget, they changed it to Alyssa and her barbed wire torment session. That was rather sad, but this turned out cool. I stuck the ends into the front and back of the church to make it look like it was running through. Then I needed some ashes, which I have a lot of because I heat my house with firewood. In Silent Hill, in the movie, there are always raining ashes, so I used spray glue and a sieve to make it snow. Brushed off some of it and then let it dry overnight, then I used red nail polish to add some more blood splashes. Finally, I can add the top part. I first clean the inside to ensure there is no dirt there, since I can't reach those parts after adding the bottom. Then I use some leftover aquarium silicone to glue it there, filling in the gaps and taping it with masking tape while drying. After a couple of hours, because I'm impatient, I remove the tape and look at it! Awesome! I sanded the wood a bit to remove the excess silicone, then I painted it with watered down acrylic paint to stain it. Then I was out for blood and made droplets out of hot glue, and this is tricky. Add a blob to the edge of a glass and let it droop while blowing on it. I glued them onto the edges and then add hot glue around them, and finally I can paint my favorite blood red nail polish. To attach it, I used the stencil I made for the head and mark where to cut the neck. Then I cut it off with my Dremel. To make it more secure, I add a tiny blob of paint, press the head on and then drill holes at the 2 dots. Then I use a piece of a toothpick to secure it. This way it will have more, than glue to stick to. To make it look neater, I added blood around the edges. It only shows if you look carefully, but I like it. And then I glue the head on. According to the mastermind behind Pyramid Head, there is just another, normal head underneath, but this is Silent Hill inspired, so I felt no regrets about taking some, artistic freedom, and this looks great. Now to put the boots on. Shoes! I sped this up for you. This is the bear thread that I inherited from my grandma, by the way. It's pretty cool, it's very sturdy. They are permanently attached with a little bow and a tiny dab of super glue on that. but they look too new, so I dabbed some brown acrylic paint to make them look dirty, and then I sprinkled some of it, and then I painted tiny eyelets, and then I moved on to the wristbands, then some thigh contraption things. I added this to cover up a tiny mistake, but it was pretty cool. But the copper also seemed too new and clean, so there are some more brown and black acrylics added to that. Now for the stand, I printed out a scene from the movie and wanted dark Alyssa standing at the bottom looking up, so I did this like a shadow box in layers, but first I wanted a black base. I used this resin, but unfortunately it didn't stick to the sides when it swirled around in the mold, so I put the lid back in with some cling foil, hoping for the best, and it kind of worked, so it was fine. I seal all the paper pieces with a lot of glue to ensure they don't get ruined in the resin. Then I glue the first picture at the bottom and cover it with resin. This is the one I use. It's a good one. It's a bit tricky because they don't have the same density, so I'm not really sure about using the same weight for them, but never mind. I prefer weight since my scale is more accurate than my eyes. I pour that on top, let it cure, glue the second one on top, and so forth. All in all, I did 3 layers of clear resin. I did this until I came to the last layer and decided to make a grid on top. I cut out 2 pieces of cardboard, I sanded them to roughen the edges and smoothen the inside, and then I used this plastic net. I staple it on, cut the excess and move on to hot gluing the second ring to hide the staples. This is 2-part silicone, you mix equal parts and it's pretty expensive but very effective. I made molds out of screws this time, it takes like an hour to cure and I can demold. I used UV resin to make a bunch of screw heads, and it took a while since I only made 1 mold of each, but it was so worth it. They're so cute and they will fit perfect with the theme. I glued them in place and mixed paint, some gold red and burnt umber, and I mixed resin in this cup before, hence the weird color, don't mind it. Then I thinned it out with some airbrush medium, but I'm thinking of using distilled water from now on. It's cheaper and as far as I've got it, it should work just fine. And then I airbrush a base layer, add some black to the paint and make darker parts. I use this varnish, it's supposed to be matte, but it's not. It's okay though, it's fine, I'm fine. To add some easy details, I used watered down black acrylics and brushed it off lightly with a cotton pad. Then I added rust, cinnamon rust. It smelled like Christmas when I did this. It was super cozy. So some glue and some cinnamon, and then when it's dry you can paint it lightly to get the right shade, and it works like a charm. This is what I have so far, good for made out of scraps, I'd say. I add the last resin layer and squeeze the grid down, then add more resin until it's partially covered. The molding time, it's not flawless, but it's perfect, and she can actually stand on her own on it. I still wanted to make it a stand, just to be sure. I twirl a chain around the wooden dowel, add a piece of wire to be better supported, and then I glue it. I tried painting with a brush, but I switched to my airbrush, it's just easier to reach all the crevices that way. Then I dry brushed it with a lighter color to bring out the details, I sealed it with varnish and let it dry overnight, and finally I drilled a hole in the base and glued it there. And there we go, a Silent Hill doll stand. Bosch does not support me, by the way, I just forgot to move it away from the video. This is not the end though. A friend of mine 3D printed these for me and included all the test pieces when he sent them. I was like kid on Christmas when it arrived. It's so freaking cool. I gave up on hand sanding the pieces and used my Dremel instead. Then I used green stuff from Army Painter to fill in the bigger gaps, and it's super easy to work with. You just cut a piece and mix it until it's green. And you know what? I have clay for any occasion. I smoosh it into the sword and smoothen it with water. Then I can sand some more, having a pencil inside the sandpaper for support. And then I prime it with this. It's marked as a health hazard, so I do it outside with my mask on. It needs some damage, which I fixed with my Dremel and X-Acto knife. I mixed silver paint with an airbrush medium, and after letting the sword dry, I used watered down burnt umber, painted, and removed the excess to enhance the damage and make it look more used. And then I painted spots, added some orange at the end and glued cinnamon onto those. Then a little earthquake hit in the form of my legs getting tangled with this stupid tripod. God, they always do that. Finally, I painted it a bit to mute it down and added some blood, and this is my favorite color, but I rarely use nail polish. Then I fixed the handle. I considered adding leather, but it would have been too bulky, so I just painted it. You're unfortunately not getting a full view of the sword until the pictures, and I am sorry about that. So I technically finished this doll for Halloween 2022, which is embarrassing. Should I have waited until this Halloween? Maybe, but I have other ideas, and I hate having projects hanging over my head. Plus, as I said, a new Silent Hill game will be released, and even though I won't play it since I am a scaredy cat, I will certainly watch gameplay like the coward I am. At least compared to my dog, who can't leave the room if there's an empty paper bag in the doorway, I am a badass. Anyway, here is what I started with, and this is the result, and the tiny little church gives me serotonin. It's so cute. Thank you so much for watching the process. It was long and it took time, and I really appreciate it. Until next time, bye!